Well, when we only have $100 for
Well,
supplies.
yeah. Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. It's going to continue to rain on every single Monday the rest of our lives. My husband drives to Kingsport on Tuesdays, and it rains on him every single time he drives to Kingsport. I don't know what that's about.
I had a geography professor say that weather actually goes in 7-day cycles. a lot
Oh,
of
really?
times. So if it seems like you get rained out every weekend, there's a reason for it.
Well,
Yeah, Carol, can Amy turn those
Yeah.
videos out?
have we signed in and picked up a handout? Good. Well, thank you for coming. And I am recording, just so you know. And, because I think people should know that if they have an outburst, that's going to be recorded. So, look at you. We are here to talk about what is really the foundation of the edTPA. And I have looked at all handbooks until I'm purple, and they're alike in a lot of really interesting ways. And so today we're going to be talking about a real foundational way that they're alike. You may have discovered this, those who's working with the edTPA and seminars. Just Angela and me. Has anybody else worked on a seminar? Well, this is kind of what you find out when you work with the edTPA, is that it looks like it ought to be just, this logical thing. They do this, and then they do that, and then they do this other thing. If you all could sign in for me, I'd appreciate it. And so you just kind of have this feeling that it should be a whole lot easier. The reality is that it looks like a crime scene board that they have like in those, and if you, it's so complex. So today what we want to do, we want to get to the point where we can understand the origin of the term subject-specific emphasis. What am I talking about when I say SSE? We're going to find those in your content handbook, and you're going to understand how it's present throughout the edTPA and explore ways that you could use it possibly in your coursework to get them used to it. All right, I'm going to give you the literacy one, but you don't get to keep them. Oh, that's why it says edTPA Coordinator copy of. I have a paranoia that you all going to run off my notebooks, if you noticed. A lot of trouble went into these notebooks. Boy, do I have a story to tell. Okay, so all the templates, prompts, and rubrics, no matter if you're special ed or if you're early childhood or whatever your content, there's an emphasis that's the foundation of the assessment. So if you think about it, that makes sense. There is a fundamental difference between teaching science and teaching literacy. There's differences to the field of teaching a math course than it would be to teaching an early childhood classroom. And you all gonna have to excuse me. I am like the Sahara Desert with my mouth today, so.
It's freaking Sahara Desert here. It's hot.
Well, it may be, but this is just dry mouth. So, Dr. Hogan and I, we came up with the term SSE. And every now and then, I'll hear the students all read in their prompts where they've written, and to address the SSE, and I'm thinking, oh no one knows what the SSE is. This is just our nickname for it. And it stands for subject-specific emphasis. Now, I've given each of you a handbook, and if you are, everybody except for SPED, I want you to turn to the first page of the handbook. Not the table of contents, but the actual first page. Not the title, but the page that has the number 1 at the bottom.
There we are.
Page 1. The number 1 at the bottom. Right there. Okay. And this is where you're going to find this information. In the early childhood, for example, it talks about the overview of the assessment, and then it says here, It talks about all the, you're going to write 3 to 5 consecutive learning experiences, and it talks about what standards they're consistent with, all the alphabet soup, and then it says the learning segment should include developmentally appropriate practices that intentionally promote the active and multimodal. Anyway, you can see what that is. So that is what we have. That's in everybody's. Now I want you to find it in the one you've got. It's in this paragraph after overview of assessment. You've got this 1, 2, 3, and you've got a paragraph, and then you probably have some bullets. Let's see. Math. And there's a paper up here for you to sign in on, and yeah, you'll get that for me. Okay. Early childhood. You cannot have my folder. It's only used for reference.
Reputation precedes me.
Okay, but can you see where it is? I'm going to show you an easier place to find it, but it is in everybody's handbook right here, except for SPED, of course. Theirs is on, it's not even, it's kind of on page 2, but where they really say it is in the EARL. So, it's going to say something like this. This is the English Language Arts, and it says, should provide opportunities for students to use textual references to construct meaning from, interpret or respond to complex text, and to create a written product, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Here you can see the one for SPED. And here's their one that's written like yours. Now you have a handout, and the handout, you've got them. It tells you what your SSE are. So you can find your subject, whether it's elementary math or whatever. So, I just want to show you where it was in the handbook. So it would be, all of them you can see, it has to do with the emphasis of instruction. So for example, I taught history. When I taught history, if I was going to do a good job, I would have used facts and concepts to help students interpret and analyze and draw conclusions and support conclusions. That was really the purpose of a history class. Now, that's how we want our students to teach. We don't want them just doing facts in a history class. Who has seen that? Who has been in a history class where they think they're just supposed to learn facts? And they're like, I can't memorize all those facts. And that's because facts and concepts is the lowest level of Bloom's, and it is just, if they only, for example, teach facts in their history classroom, they're not even going to get a 3. So, it is really important that we know what these things are. Okay, let's take a look at math. All the math is pretty much the same, whether it's elementary, middle grades, or secondary. I've got 2 math people here. Thank you. And they need to concentrate on conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, mathematical reasoning, problem solving. Precise communication skills is for everybody. But those are the 3. Now, that is what you do. And it is what we are working with our students with. But the problem is, when we get them in seminar, and I say, you know, your subject-specific emphasis, you know, conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and mathematical reasoning, and they looking at me like, you know, and I talked to Dr. Price about this last year, and she's like, that's all we talk about. But the problem, and this is why we're having this meeting today, is not that they don't hear about it in class. The problem is that they're not getting a chance to apply it. And that's what we've got to work on. We've got to figure out how to get this in our courses so that they're using it earlier. Special ed, just because this is being recorded, They have theirs is a whole lot more complicated. This is what it says in the URL. The literacy is crazy because they choose their own. It drives me crazy. So those of you who are elementary literacy, I gave you 2 folders. And the other folder is called what I call the URL. It's right here. It says URL. I want you to look at the very back of it, about page 48. And you will see that the students are to choose. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just gave you the back. That's all there was. Good. That was smart of me. I saved a bunch of paper. But they are to choose. For our central focus, they choose either comprehension or composition. And then they choose from the left-hand column, which is what they're calling essential literacy strategies. And they choose 1 or more from the right-hand column for related skills. So after talking with Dr. Moran, she's using this more and more in her teaching and her reading classes. And she even this fall, when she was having the students work on their units, she had them identify what was their essential literacy strategy, what were their related skills, which objectives were supporting those subject-specific emphasis. It's very helpful. Early childhood, you guys will have to help me, but this is how I was able to break it down, and you can tell me if you think that looks right. It's developmentally appropriate practice, of course, that promotes active nature of learning, multimodal nature of learning, language and literacy development in an interdisciplinary context. That's very complex. They put something very complex down there with those early childhood folks. That's not as easy as my history folks. They've just got this nice little list of 3 things they got to hit. And so that's pretty complicated. The special ed is more so. They got to support a learning goal and demonstrate, this is for a focused learner, the learning goal for the focused learner, demonstrate his or her learning. They've got to align at least 1 goal in the IEP. It needs to be relevant to academic or non-academic standards. They need to reflect the IEP identified adaptations of the learning environment, content, instructional strategies, and in talking with Jen Cook, she and I added assessments. So basically it's support for accessing content and demonstrating learning. It's alignment and it's adaptations for the learning environment, the content, the strategies, and the assessment. So organizing these things and presenting them to the students, these are things you need to be focusing on in your instruction. We're doing it, but it's not necessarily something that they realize is a focus. How do we connect it? Well, the rubrics in most handbooks, really all of them, except for world language. In Rubric 1, they are planning for the subject-specific emphasis throughout the learning segment. I have this in your handout. I don't like to print PowerPoint slides. Rubric 5, how will you assess the subject-specific emphasis? So this is critical, because if they aren't planning to teach them, they're not going to be able to assess them. And then when you get down here, they have to be able to analyze how they did on the subject-specific emphasis. And surely if you haven't planned them, and if you haven't assessed them, you're not going to be able to analyze them. Then, how are you going to engage them in it? And how are you going to deepen student learning? That looks different with every single content area. And we have this wonderful document, which you don't have in your hand right now because it's 55 pages long, but it's called the URL. And it gives a really good understanding of what that is. It's called Understanding Rubric Level Progressions. So this is how it's connected. Rubric 1 is connected with Rubric 5 because you have to have clear alignment between the objectives, the subject-specific emphasis, and the assessment. This is essential. And to Rubric 15, because going forward into the next unit, how am I going to be able to help the students with the SSE that they're struggling with? We're doing very poorly on Rubric 15. Well, okay, we're not doing poorly on anything. Let's be real. We're doing great. We're above the national average. This is one of our worst places, though. So if we have to look at where we're having problems, it's going to be at this rubric. And the reason is not because the students are tired. I say that to them. But the reason is because they don't understand what they're supposed to do here. Let's say I'm a history teacher. And I find that my students, I know that I've got to teach facts and concepts, inquiry and analysis, and do some kind of justification exercise. They've got to do some sort of justifying. That's the third. All the blooms. I got to do that with every single unit, no matter what I'm teaching. What if I find in my analysis that my students are really strong in making arguments, the highest level blooms, but they're weak in facts and concepts? What does that tell me about my next steps? That's what we're supposed to be writing about, not how we're going to remediate the same thing over and over again. Not how we're going to go back and reteach, because that question's been asked. That question has been asked in a previous prompt. And people think, well, I've already written about this. And I'm saying, no, you haven't. You haven't written about this because you've not understood what the prompt is. So when we're supervisors, we can talk to the students and we can say, okay, what is it the students are struggling with? And when you teach, what can you do to help them with that? Another way to look at it is that since we're supposed to be looking at both their strengths and weaknesses, what is it that they're good at? They're good at, in my class I was talking about, good at drawing conclusions, defending arguments. How can we use that strength to help them with what they're struggling with? So these are the types of things that we need to be addressing and looking at. Okay, this sets us up for video evidence. We can't get video evidence of facts and concepts or all these things that we're talking about. We can't get video evidence of these subject-specific emphasis unless it's planned. It's just not going to happen. So it's got to be planned, and it's got to be planned to where it's going to hit pretty close together because of our video requirements. We have to plan specific questions that are going to deepen understanding of these subject-specific emphasis. And the pedagogy. Aha! Rubric 9. Everybody's got a completely different Rubric 9. That's because if you teach math, what's important are representations. And so if you teach history, what's important are primary source documents. So there's always this thing. With science, they have to demonstrate that they're using data. That's got to be seen on video. So here's the planning commentary, and it's associated with Rubric 1. And if you look on page 10 of your little booklet, then you'll see that here it is. There's the question. That's the subject-specific emphasis for history. And yours will be in there too. That's this right here.
Oh.
Yep, no, it's this one. Right here. So you're looking for the one that says handbook. You're going to look on about page 10. Here you go. Here's a science one. And here's the rubric. And look at it. You can't even get, you can't even go above it. You can't get above a 1. Look at that. This is what used to be a problem and isn't anymore. We started paying attention. So this is in secondary ed, this is one of the single most thing we paid attention to. And it's done a big, big thing for our students. This one is, this is PE. So they've got the domains, psychomotor, affective, cognitive, what they do is really smart. In their lesson plan, they've added in, next to everybody's objective, the students have to put, whether it's psychomotor, cognitive, or affective, every single objective in every lesson plan. I love that. Now, this one is prompt 5. You can find it around page 11 of your handbook. I wonder how many of you, this is the first time you've seen a handbook. Yeah. There are people I know because you just went with you. You don't work with it, right? Look at that. They have to show formal and informal assessments all the way throughout their learning segment, and it has to do with the SSE.
Now, will mine say prompt 5 as well? Or am I looking for that?
Everybody's looking for prompt 5 around page 11.
It's on page 12.
Everybody's got a different page number, too, because, you know, why make it easy for people to walk? Okay. And look at that. Everybody's got this, too. So they have to be thinking about, and this is the topic of another sermon, not just IEPs and 504 plans, but people who struggle, children that are gifted. They need to be thinking about all the different learners. That's prompt 5. And look again, they can't even get a level 2 unless their assessments are assessing those things, those subject-specific emphasis. Very important. And it's around page 17 or 18 that you'll find this rubric 5. Here's the one for early childhood. Again, evidence of multiple modalities. This is the special ed one. Daily assessment records aligned to all lesson objectives. Okay, prompt 3A, that's going to be around page 20. This is where it says, explain how your instruction engaged students in constructing meaning from, this is, or whatever your SSE is. So, they can't just do a fun activity. They have to plan intentionally what it is that they're teaching and show evidence of it. Now, fortunately, because of the brevity of the video that they submit, normally they do not have to show video evidence of every single subject-specific emphasis. So you have to go to your own handbooks.
Terryl,
Here's an art one, yeah?
I'm sorry to go off, maybe off topic a bit, but their video requirements have changed, haven't they? You know, is it still 10 minutes?
Everybody's got something different.
Okay, this subject.
Everybody, and so I've got one of my GAs working on a big reference chart for me.
Wonderful.
Because I can't remember. I know like elementary math can have 0, I mean they can have 1 or 2 videos, combined 15 minutes. Elementary literacy has to have 2 videos, combined 20. So it's, what's your alls, Angela? Do you know what off the top of your
We
head?
have to have 2 videos, a whole group and small group, no more than 15 minutes combined.
So it's very different for everybody. And that's a lot to get into a little bit of learning. So this is all rubric 7, which is around page 24 or 25 of your handbook. Again, student engagement is big. They can't say, it can't just be the teacher talking about the subject-specific emphasis. The students have to be engaged in it. So that's kind of difficult because oftentimes our students don't really know what we mean by engaged. I have some secondary folks who, you know, and I'm not bad on set, you know, I love them, but this is a minor for them. So they don't have a lot of the background that people who have a major. But they have a tendency to not know what engagement means. They think their students writing or reading something would be engagement. That's not going to be enough. I have some students try to pass off active listening. That's not going to do it either.
They're going like this, Terryl.
They're engaged. It's not like the dogs that are paying attention when you feed them. It's not the kind of engagement we're talking about. Prompt 4A, this is around page 20. This is where they have to have video evidence that you have elicited responses from your students, and you have built on those students' responses in the SSE. So it's specific. And that's video evidence. They can't just write about it. They can't just plan it. And this is why we're struggling. Rubric 8 is an area of struggle. And then 4B is scored with Rubric 9, and it has to do with, for math, it has to do with understand how you're going to support students understanding using representations. Everybody, again, has something different. So this is crazy because you would think, okay, that all of this would be scored by one rubric, but no. 4A is scored by Rubric 8, and then 4B is scored by Rubric 9. So you just have to, you find that out by looking at the URL.
You know, as I'm looking at this, one of the things I wonder, do we need to, like in each content area, look at developing student guidelines that are more specific than even the lesson plans?
I think that's an excellent idea.
So, for example, on the assessment, I mean, I know on the lesson plan it just says assessments, but do we need to go a step further and say where are multiple forms of assessments and throughout the lesson and for individuals and groups?
Well, it's one of the reasons that I did put informal and formal on in the elementary template and the secondary ed template, and then also formative and summative. But that's discussion for the 24th. But I agree, and I think though primarily is where our focus needs to be on the learning objectives. That's where it begins. Are they planning to teach these subject-specific emphasis? It looks a little different for elementary, not elementary, for early childhood, because this is not about what they teach, it's about how it's taught. So, and it's that way for special ed as well. So, but still, they're there. I have some suggestions that you'll see in a minute. So they have to have evidence that they've used this representation. Now, we need to pay attention to Rubric 7, 8, and 9. We're not doing as well there as I believe that we could. It doesn't reflect the quality of instruction that we know that they're getting here at Clemmer College. And so I think just being aware of what's in these rubrics, of what students need to be planning, and using this language when we talk to them. This content-specific language is very important. And so happy to see you here today, Dr. Stevens, and thank you so much for coming, because that's our math methods person that comes from arts and sciences, so I really appreciate you. This is Rubric 9, as you can see, provides opportunities for students to use representations in ways that deepen their understanding of concepts and procedures. I'm sorry, my eyesight's terrible. And then they have to get a 5, you really are going above, this is crazy, facilitating interactions among students. So it's just it's very rigorous. But I think we could at least think that we're going to be able to do this here. This is the subject-specific methodology or the pedagogy that's different in all of the Rubric 9. I have those listed for you in your handout on the back on page 2 on the back. And I don't have everybody's. These are just the ones that I did get together. We've got performing arts up there, PE, technology, a lot of different ones. Task 3, prompt 1. It's so funny because it drives me crazy because sometimes things will be in the prompt but not in the rubric, and other times they're in the rubric but not in the prompt. And here's an example of where this is in the prompt but it's not in the rubric. So students have to, when they're planning their assessments, they have to be thinking, okay, how am I going to assess these subject-specific emphasis?
Terrell, I need that picture. They're two of my favorite students right
I know it. Aren't they sweeties? So you have to, oftentimes, it's just a matter of reading through the handbook, comparing the prompts with the rubrics. So the students need to be thinking about their students. Did my students perform well on specific subject-specific emphasis? And how does this inform my instruction going forward? Are students struggling with specific SSE? And how does that inform my instruction? So you've got to be thinking about this. So you have students that continue to struggle, you have students that perform well. Not sure what I said a minute ago. I may have said that backward. This is what we're getting at in Rubric 15. So if I could get Rubric 15, us to think about that Rubric 15 today, I will have accomplished a really good goal for myself. Because Rubric 15 shouldn't be so hard. The problem is that the prompt doesn't ask us to do what the rubric makes us do. Look at that. That's the rubric that's assessing that prompt. And in that rubric, in order to move above a level 3, you have to talk about your next steps in relation to the subject-specific emphasis and the analysis that you made about the subject-specific emphasis in the rubric prompt 1 of task 3, which would be like rubric 11. It's all that way. So again, how these things align and back each other up. So let's talk about how we could put these in our lessons. These are just some ideas. I have them in your packet. I know some of you have to leave early. I really appreciate you coming and giving me the time that you can. But clearly, for special education, they need to always be thinking about support, alignment, and adaptation, all the time. So here, with special education, my idea is that this would be a lot, but what if you planned your unit thinking about your IEP goal, the objective that you made from the IEP goal, the task that's associated with the objective and the goal, how you're going to informally assess it and formally assess it, how you want to help them, support them in accessing the content, and demonstrating the learning. And then what kind of adaptations do you have for environment, content, strategies, and assessment? Early childhood. Give me your thoughts on this. Listing the standards of their learning objective, thinking about the active nature of learning, multimodal nature of learning, and identifying the language literacy development. This is similar to what you have in your thinking organizer document, I think. PE, this is the competency. How is it assessed? What domain is it? So just some simple planning. This is the one I like to use with secondary ed and elementary. The objective, what SSE is being addressed with that objective, how are we going to informally assess it and formally assess it. So I have them do these types of things when we're planning a learning segment. Now here's a pre-planning document that you could use. Here's the first objective. So these are in this packet right here. The one that I gave you, okay. The learner will, and then as you can see, you would create a column for each objective in the lesson plan. Put checks or X's to indicate which SSE you've targeted with these objectives. And you might not address every SSE every day. In every subject, in every lesson, that's not called for. And then thinking about the assessments that are going to evaluate the progress. So this is how it could look. So this is respond to music theater with clear music/theater, not music theater, because this is the performing arts one. with clear and consistent connections to knowledge and skills, contextual understanding, artistic expression. That's their SSE. So, the learner will, I just put music stuff. So it could look something like this when they were planning their learning segment. So not only could you plan your, so this is actually not, this is a lesson, and this would be a learning segment where you've got other lessons. So you're planning lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3 for your learning segment. How are you going to address the SSE and when in each lesson? So as a pre-planning, when they're talking about planning a unit, having them think about those things. Here's an example of what this looks like. Let's say in a curriculum, you're developing the curriculum for history, for your semester. And in my semester, I'm going to teach Prohibition, Women's Suffrage, and Great Depression. So you're helping the students think of these things as the foundational blocks. That's the basis of a solid curriculum. So here's your facts and concepts, some essential questions, and then an activity where they build and support arguments. And then you do that all the way through. If you're assessing each of these, then if I'm teaching Prohibition and find that my students did great with the debate, but had difficulty with the facts and concepts, then I use that information going forward when I teach women's suffrage. I don't spend the rest of the year on Prohibition. It's because it's not about Prohibition, it's about these basic foundational blocks. It's about whether my history students can do these things appropriately as a historian. So that's the beauty of it. And it makes a lot of sense, especially when you start thinking about a spiral curriculum. So, what are some things we can do to help our students prepare? And I know I've gone through things really fast. But, first of all, get a term that works for your own program. I call it SSE because that works for me to come up with that. And the students learn what it is, they learn what they are. Put these, I think, put the SSE that we have here on this document, they need to be everywhere. They need to be on posters, they need to be on lesson plans, they need to be everywhere. Have students identify which of these that they're working on. When there's no problem at all, reason why we can't, for example, put for secondary ed math, put that in their lesson plan and have them highlight what part of that SSE they're doing. The more they see it, the more they understand it. Make sure that we're teaching the methodology that's in Rubric 9 and giving them, not just teaching it to them, but giving them opportunity to practice it. And if they're not getting opportunity to practice it in class, in their placements, then we need to give them some opportunity to give them, at least to observe it being done, maybe through those Atlas videos, or to give them opportunity to practice with each other in class. They need to have practice writing assessments, both formal and informal, that address the SSE. So in an assessment course, say, okay, I want you to create, or in any course, I want you to create an assessment. I want 25% of it to be conceptual understanding, 10% of it to be procedural fluency, whatever you decide would be appropriate. But putting it in there and having them actually get involved in it, because one of the things I read recently that really resonated with me is that when we're waiting until Residency 1 to bring all this stuff together, and then we're pushing it at them, this new vocabulary, they can't get above a 3 or 4 because they don't have an in-depth understanding. It's just very surface level, their understanding. So we know as educators that they need opportunity to have application. So, higher order questioning, I'm terrible at that. Somebody needs to be teaching that in their classes. Not waiting for me, because I'm very bad at it. And at learning, there's some people who are really good at that. Norma Hogan was. She drove me crazy. But she was really good with that particular thing, because she'd have some come in, they'd be in an interview, and she'd ask them a hard question, and they'd look at her, and then she would prompt them, and then she would build on it. She was really good at that particular skill. And having that, that is something they need a lot of practice with. Now, when you look at, I don't have all the documents, but I want you to take a look at this packet that I gave you. And I want you to take a look, for instance, at this right here. See if you can find that. Now, this is what they use in literacy. They come up with the essential literacy strategies, the related skills, and that's how, this is what they have in the handbook. I don't really like it. Does anybody know why? Huh?
It's linear instead of.
Yeah, it is linear. My biggest problem is that the standard's at the bottom. They should not be finding the standard last. And that, I know what to tell people. I'll say to the students, I'll say, you've got to come in here and you've got to tell me what what are you teaching for your learning segment. Well, my teacher wants me to do this, and they start describing an activity. I say, stop right there. I don't want to know about the activity. I want to know what you're teaching. My question is, what is your standard? And so getting to that standard and using the standard and then finding the literacy strategy, we have still have a problem with cutesy activities. Finding the cutesy activity first and then saying, ooh, let's do that because that'd be really good on film, and then we'll make the objectives from that. But that doesn't work because it's not what we're looking for. So literally, you can have the most boring lesson on video ever, but if the students are engaged in the SSE and you're asking questions about the SSE and they're doing activities about the SSE, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've got great technology. It doesn't matter if you're teaching in a hallway or in the best classroom that we have in the area, because it's all about the SSE. So, my suggestion, this didn't get run off on the, okay. So anyway, this didn't get run off on landscape. It should have. So with this one, you can see how I have them do their central focus, their curriculum standards, and then their lesson one, their methods, their formal, goes on. Here's another way of taking the math and dividing it up, thinking about it. I'm so sorry. I'm going to send this document to you all so that you can see it the way it's supposed to look, because it's supposed to be on landscape. And here on the back, this one is really good. Takes them through. I make them do this before they do their learning segment on the back. The objectives, standards that are the focus of the objective. How are you going to assess those SSE? What's the criteria for performance? They really struggle with that. And that's one thing we'll talk about in the assessments. Because what they're wanting to do is to come up with the assessment. As in, here's a test. They're not wanting to think about, or they're not understanding that what they really need to focus on is the evaluation criteria. The most important document they make for task 3 is the evaluation criteria. Everything hinges on that. Because the evaluation criteria tells what exactly that you're looking for, how you're going to evaluate their progress, how you're going to analyze it, all of that. I do want you to also look on the very last page. Just came in here, and see that this is my graduate, one of my graduate assistants, Shane Carroll, and this is his work on the back, the very back. And he is, can you believe that? Now he teaches history.
Oh, it's fine.
And so he has created this rubric, and he realized on his own that identifying facts and concepts in thinking about what he was teaching and what he was assessing. Identifying facts and concepts was important to what he's calling correctness. Were they doing an essay?
No, they,
It's that whole thing they're doing.
I have like a packet of questions where I
Yeah.
teach with the graphic organizer as an informal formative assessment every day. And then they can use those on these assessments that are also different types of graphic organizers. A lot of double and triple Venn diagrams, fishbone diagrams. So they have the material in front of them, but the way I ask them to compare and contrast is in a different medium.
Yeah.
So they don't have the answers in front of them, but they have to interpret the facts that they've already interpreted before, and that's analysis. So I count completeness is how, if there's something that's factually correct, so they get all of these from readings, and that to me is how I teach. It also increases their disciplinary and interdisciplinary literacy for all students.
Can I just take full credit for it? I can. I tell you, the three of us will take credit for sure. Well, thank you. What I will say, what he's done that's so phenomenal with this rubric is that he has thought about how he can create this rubric that's going to give him information on these subject-specific emphasis. So he's had to teach them, he's had to plan the teaching, and he's had to plan the assessment for it. And then, after he's given the assessment, he can gather that information and he can then make an analysis based on facts, concepts, and those SSC.
I've already started doing that today. I didn't bring them with me, and I don't know if I can actually show you because I don't like addition code.
Yeah.
But for my strengths to improve, he did very well in identifying facts and concepts. I know this because such and such. Here's to improve. Oh, you're struggling with a summary because you don't have a synthesis statement. That's where you need to improve, is that synthesis statement. Here's how we get there together.
What he's describing there is the feedback that he gives the students based on the subject-specific emphasis. Now, to me, this just improves teaching. I think I'm sold on it. I will say this about the edTPA, and I'm really not big on big standardized types of assessments, but I love this. This element, I think, makes us focus on what we're teaching, what we're doing, and how we're giving feedback. And to where it is just, I'm going to send you all the actual document. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I should have looked at that. Yeah. So when they're planning, they need to be thinking about their subject-specific emphasis. When they're teaching, they need to be thinking about it. And they need to be assessing based on that. And they need to plan next steps based on that. So you can see how it would really improve not just their performance on the edTPA, but improve their performance as a teacher. Because those are all standards-based. They come from the Common Core.
Can I add something, Mr. Robinson? Mrs. Yates? So I'm so adjusting. I have that same type of rubric on the back of every single one of my activities too. And so I compile them, their notebook activities, and I collect them once a week. So I grade them on the same criteria. So when they get to assessment time, they know I need to cite during class to make sure I have my citations. I need to work on my analyses and syntheses. And so the rubric I grade them on the same criteria, but I just change the quantifiable and qualitative aspects of the rubric for the assessment. And then I make it an amended assessment rubric for both of my informal and formal activities. So I have a third of my class is RTI and IEP. There's a lot of overlap there, but they're actually the best in the class right now. Not because of the amended rubric, but because I've been helping to scaffold them to get the information and helping them analyze it in their own way. And that goes to all of you all. I don't know you all.
So I really think one of the best things also that I want to make sure that, leave you with is that when they are planning for the subject-specific emphasis, teaching it, and you're assessing it, and then you're going to analyze it. Now you can imagine, task 3, when we go there, the first thing students want to do is that they want to associate points with everything. And I won't even listen to it. I say, I don't want to hear anything about points, I don't want to hear anything about grades, because they're meaningless. The edTPA, if you were to write a task 3 and say 80% of the students made a grade of 85 and up,
You wouldn't pass the edTPA.
that doesn't tell us anything. That's no information about their learning. That has to do with their maybe a level of achievement toward a grade, but it doesn't tell us anything about what they learned. So we have to get them to start thinking about how they're going to assess the objective, how are they going to express that. So they start talking about then, I've got 80% of the class who are doing well with facts and concepts. And these are the trends that I see of the folks who are doing well and the trends of folks that aren't doing well. So when you have a math class and they're doing great with procedural fluency, but they have absolutely no idea about the concepts, or they're doing poorly with mathematical reasoning, then that's some information you can think about as a teacher going forward that's going to actually do something to improve the learning in the classroom. Now, I rushed through everything, and it's a whole lot of information for just an hour, but I wanted to leave some time at the end for ideas or questions.
I am biology.
Yeah.
That's my world. I am supervising students in history, English, and math, no
Yes.
science. Do I have access to this online where I can see how this relates to those subjects?
Yes.
Because,
You should be in my edTPA D2L,
I can
and
check.
that is where it all is.
She may need to, it would be under the administrative tab though.
see, and you know me in D2F.
We're going to show you where it is.
That's like a whole other country.
It's not, and you're better at computers. You do it, you just do not used it before. But it's there, and but that's where we have to put it, because you're not supposed to put, these handbooks are not supposed to be like on a website
They have to
link.
be password.
Yeah, so that's why they're in that. And so it is good. So you've got there for conversations that you have with your students. You know, how are you planning for the SSE? And they're going to hate you for bringing that up, because they hate the SSE, because it's so much easier just to teach the way that someone else is doing in front of them, especially if it's very poor teaching. Very poor teaching is pretty easy to emulate.
Yeah, but if we all start using that language, like you said, Terrell, it'll be okay.
I think so too.
We all start using common SSE.
A problem I see, not a big problem, but with some students, is that they're having to teach what the teacher's saying. And this is how we do it, and this is what I want you to do, rather than them coming up with a plan
Yes.
and the objective, all that, you know what I'm saying?
Well, that's not going to work for the
I
edTPA.
know.
So at least they get the experience during that, of that. Now, what I do tell them is this. With the planning commentary, it's planning. All of y'all have taught. Have you ever planned something that didn't happen? That it's like almost every other time that you teach, right? Does it happen exactly the way you planned it? No. Does that mean you went back and changed your lesson plans? No. Planning is separate from instruction. So a teacher, or one of our teachers, our students, ought to be planning it the way it should be taught, whether or not they get to teach it that way or not. So at least for the edTPA, that's what I tell them. You plan it the way it should be taught. And if you're not allowed to do it that way, then you don't. But at least you'll have the planning right. And so they have to think of other ways that they're going to get that in. I really think that a lot of teachers out there are aware at some level that this is what they ought to be doing, and that they just need maybe somebody to nudge them. They know that they need to be having these things. So that they're a history teacher. They've been in a lot of history classrooms. They just need some nudging. And I think also figuring out a way when they're so bogged down with maybe facts because they know that standardized test is coming up, for them to maybe get rejuvenated, thinking about a way that you could do that in another way that's not just drill and kill.
I think another thing we need to be encouraging our mentors about is not providing our interns with a little folder of cute activities and say, this lesson went so well last year, do this.
Happens all the
I
time.
know, and we really need to stop that.
Can we have that mentor training or mentor seminar or whatever we did have for a couple of years? I know it was funded by Race to the Top.
We have a study, we're participating in a study right now, our mentors are, but I mean, not all mentors are participating. But if they want to, they can, or they're either in a control or treatment group, but they're getting additional training. And then Terryl has done an online, and it's out there, right?
Yeah. Hasn't had a lot of views, but yes, it is there, and it's, also, Laura Click and I are gonna go do the Laura and Terrell show
Yes.
all over the countryside.
So instead of asking the mentors to come here, we're going to the mentors.
That's probably a great idea, yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I think most of them just don't, who does have an idea of the complexity of the edTPA? The most people have, I find, fall in two categories. They either think it's so complex, there's no way they're ever going to come to an understanding about it, which I have to say, I did it. You can too, right? And then you've got others that just really truly feel that all they have to do is continue doing what they're doing in their classes and teaching the teachers to be good teachers, and that all the things will fall into place for them. And that may have worked for a while, but our scores go up to a 40 and to a 42 next year. And at 40, we're going to have some failures. We're going to have people who aren't going to make a 40 if we continue to do what we've been doing. So it's not a whole lot that we need to change. It's just some language, it's some activities, it's some focus. I think we it's a big deal to me, for example, that we started using more often the terms informal and formal assessments. I think that right there is helpful.
And then there's a crop of people, and I'm including this, who has never, ever heard of this until I started supervising.
I know.
And so I think you have mentors.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of the mentors they don't have any idea.
Right.
Anybody else?
I just want to say thank you,
Oh,
because you do a fabulous job.
This is so complicated.
This is all I do, though.
Yeah, but you do a great job.
So it is all I do. I'm absorbed in it. And it is one of those things, it's just like anything. The more you look at it, the more you read it, the more you talk about it, I learn something. So Janice was saying that she learns something every time she comes. Well, I learn something every time I open one of these things. I didn't know until I was preparing for this where the subject-specific emphasis really was written in the special ed documents. And I didn't really know what that was for them, although I knew they had to have one because I knew that the whole assessment was built on that foundation.
Now, is there a place that I can go, probably D2O, that says, as if I were someone who's grading one of these, and I can see the whole thing presented? It's upload. This is what it looks like. The whole thing.
Well,
edTPA, yes.
So the best I can do is to tell you to look at the D2L site and to follow the modules.
Take a look at that.
Because I go through each prompt individually. There really isn't a way to look at everything at one time. It is too large.
Right.
So it is something that takes a long time. The training that they do online for scores, I highly recommend. That is something that you could do.
Right.
You could become a scorer.
Oh.
And the training they pay you for, and they pay you for scoring. And that is a way that you can see, how it all connects.
If your friends
Well, all of my students are like, I asked them, how's it going? And some of them, I'm videotaping this week, videotaped last week. Great. I mean, I so far, no one has looked like they are in panic.
You're also welcome to come to a seminar. I shall put you to work.
Well, I'm just curious to see, are my kids really okay about it, or are they like,
I know all of mine are saying, oh, it's good.
it's good? One was concerned about so many kids being absent from their
Yeah.
classes due
Yeah.
to sickness.
Yeah.
And then videotaping the next day would have kids gone, and then the
Well,
next day
schools
they're all
have been
back.
closing because there's some.
So they're worried about that, but, it's good, it's going, one girl, I videotaped, it's fantastic, forgot to press play. I mean, just.
Oh, me too. It's okay.
Yeah, she was great. I've got 4 days. I've got
That's
time.
right, they got more days, you
Yeah.
can tape again. Well, thank you so much for coming. Please make sure that you return these. Thank you, thank you. And just put them up here and we'll get them together. Thank you, thank you. I need the, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did everybody sign this?
Call right now, I know they're going to come.
Okay, I guess so.
Come to a meeting, I told them, I'm not gonna make it, I gotta go to this. That's on me.
You're getting picked up.
Just
I'm
get it
getting
all
picked
mixed
up.
up. Don't worry about it. I'll get them.
Okay.
Yeah, we-
My
There's a
car is
system.
today.
No systems.
I'd say Larry's
Thank
probably
you.
here somewhere.
And thanks for my looping, because, you know, we always like try to love.
We always have.
She was upset when I were not
I had to borrow.
Because I'm working with some of the second.
Steal it? You want to steal my edTPA materials? I'm on to you.
Can I ask you?
I'm on to you, Edward. Thank you.
Are you in this talk? I turned off the projector, like you do whatever you
Thank
need to
you.
do with that, honey. I wish I could help you, but I'm getting picked up.
Thank you, thank you.
Not for a date or anything, just picked up.
Nope.
So I don't know.